In Sonnet 130, Shakespeare uses imagery and diction in order to contrast appealing elements with the speaker's mistress. The imagery that Shakespeare uses helps his audience to create a picture in their minds. An example of Shakespeare using imagery when he says that his mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. He is trying to say that her eyes are kind of dull and not shiny. Like the sun is very bright and shiny and light, but his mistress's eyes are like the exact opposite of what the sun is. He uses a lot of elements in nature to like help emphasize the imagery that he uses and the contrast between his mistress and like elements within the nature. So like when he says that if the snow be white, why then her breasts are dun, and he's saying that like snow is very white and bright, but her breasts are dun, which means like they're grayish brown, so they're very dull. And he uses that contrast to emphasize like how the mistress appears to him. And he's also saying that Coral is far more red than her lips. So he's basically saying that there's no color on her lips, and like he again uses like elements in nature to emphasize the contrast between like appealing elements and like how the mistress is conveyed in his eyes. When Shakespeare says that there are no such roses, see I in her cheeks, he's saying that like the red and the white that are in roses aren't apparent in her cheeks. So like her face doesn't have a lot of color to it. Like she's very dull and not colorful. So Shakespeare uses the mistress's eyes and the sun, coral and the red in her lips that isn't in her lips, and like the white snow and her breasts that are done, and the red and the white in roses that aren't apparent in her cheeks. So he uses all those like elements in nature and like the imagery. You can like, create a picture of what his mistress looks like within your mind, because he uses like elements that we know, and that we know like what they look like. So you can easily like compare and contrast those elements that he uses with like how he describes his mistress to us. So that helps like the reader and his audience to kind of understand like what he sees when he looks at his mistress. Shakespeare also uses diction to contrast the appealing elements with the speaker's mistress, and the diction that he uses is like associated with negative connotations. So, for example, he uses treads instead of like, like that just sounds very like loud and heavy. And he uses reeks to describe his mistress's breath, which is very negatively connotated. And he also uses dun right here. That means like dull and grayish brown. So all of the diction that he uses has very negative connotations associated with them, which helps the reader understand that like the speaker is trying to get across that his mistress isn't like, bright and colorful, and like she doesn't like walk swiftly on the ground, like she treads. So that means like it's gonna be heavy and loud and like not as graceful as most, like as a goddess. So he's comparing like a goddess to, or contrasting a goddess to how his mistress treads on the ground. So, the vivid imagery that Shakespeare uses and the negatively connotated diction helps emphasize the contrast between elements, like different elements, and the speaker's mistress.